Hi everyone, welcome. We're just going to wait a couple of seconds or minutes until everyone settles in, and then we will get started. So maybe at like 8:01 or 8:02. There is a chat box if you want to let us know where you're calling from. So I just wrote a message in there, so maybe you want to write your name or something. Okay, so while we're waiting for everyone, I'm just going to start off with an acknowledgement of country statement. So I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which this event is taking place and pay our respects to Indigenous elders of the past, present, and emerging. Sovereignty has never been ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I also recognize those whose ongoing efforts to protect and promote Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures will leave a lasting legacy for future elders and leaders. Okay, so hi everyone. Welcome to the latest WORK180 event. So for anyone that's not familiar with WORK180, we are jobs boards with a difference. We pre-screen employers on paid parental leave, pay equity, flexible working arrangements, and much more. So this information is not actually publicly listed elsewhere. So when you use WORK180, it's really essential that you do your job search this way when assessing employers. And these events we do for our community, they're free. And they're in this community space where we offer free career coaching sessions, and it's also a safe space where you can ask questions and get some help from like-minded women. So today we're going to hear from Hannah. So she's one of our career coaches. So you may have seen her around the forum, and I'm going to pass it over to her to introduce herself. But yeah, please feel free to chat in the chat box, and we'll be taking questions at the end. We're also going to be recording this and then sending it out. So if you miss anything, don't worry. Yeah, but otherwise we're just happy to connect with you all. So please make use of the chat box, and I will put myself on mute and hand it over to Hannah.
Thanks, Jenna. And thanks very much to all of you who have signed up today and given up the next sort of, I'm going to say half an hour to an hour. I always promise to keep it short and on point, and then I just find that I have so much to say on the topic that time flies. But I'm going to aim to talk for sort of half an hour to 45 minutes, so there's a little bit of time at the end. If I go to an hour and I don't manage to catch your question, I'm more than happy for follow-up afterwards, so feel free to get in contact. I think this is my third or fourth webinar now for WORK180. It's really nice to see, I think, some probably new faces there, but I also know there are a few people out there who've been to one of my webinars before. If we haven't met, my name is Hannah. I'm the founder and director of Small Circle and a mum of two. I've got a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. I'm based here in Melbourne, and I have lived and worked in several countries, also including the UK and New Zealand. So I know there'll be a number of you in the audience today who are not based in Australia, but perhaps elsewhere in the world. So my business, Small Circle, helps professional women create careers they love, secure amazing roles, change direction, and negotiate better deals through coaching, strategy, and standout CVs. I predominantly work with women, so I would say about 85% of my clients are women. But over the last 6 months or so, I have had an increasing number of male clients too. Given that WORK180 is an organisation that supports professional women, the webinars and the content that I will speak to today does have a more female slant on it. So some of the challenges or the issues that I'll touch upon are a little bit more female-centric. But that's not to say that when I talk about things like struggling with boundaries or people-pleasing, that those are not issues that men also struggle with, because I do see that within my male clients too. It's just obviously we're a female audience today, and I do predominantly work with women. So in my first webinar of 2024, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I see as 5 smart habits for you to cultivate this year. I've spoken about some of these before. Some of them a couple of that I've added in are a little bit new. I am seeing them as being more sort of skills that are sought after and very much helping my clients to sort of get ahead when it comes to their professional lives. So the 5 topics that I'm going to touch upon are setting strong boundaries. That's something that I've definitely spoken, with WORK180 webinars before. Mastering the networking game. Again, that's something that's come up. Continuous professional development, boosting self-confidence, and the art of public speaking. All right, let's dive in. So, setting strong boundaries. This is something that I've spoken about, as I said, on a number of my webinars. It's a common issue that I see when I'm working with clients. So, look, I don't want to generalize, but I will start by just touching upon some of the reasons why I think women struggle so much with boundaries. And again, that's not to say that men don't struggle with some of these issues. A lot of women that I work with are part-time workers or mums. And I think, if you're a part-time worker, particularly if you also have child care responsibilities, or you're raising young children, it can be really difficult to manage boundaries. And a lot of the women that I speak to, particularly part-time women and particularly mums or those with caring responsibilities, have this sort of underlying sense of guilt that they're not able to sort of give more at work or be more present. And at the same time, often when they're at work and they're in that professional mode, there's this sort of underlying sense of guilt, or like they're not delivering as much as they would like to as mothers or caregivers. Sometimes they might have, an elderly parent that they're caring for, or perhaps their spouse is unwell and sort of at home and they've got some caring responsibilities there. So particularly for women who are part-time, there can sort of be this sense that you're not doing as much as you could be, or that others are perceiving you as sort of giving less within the workplace. Something I often hear, particularly from women who maybe work part-time because they have to do things like school pickups, they can often feel really uncomfortable if they're leaving the office. Even now, post-COVID, where people are working more flexibly and sort of hours are a little bit more fluid, there can sort of be this sense that they only have one foot in the door. And when you've got children, which many of my clients do, often kids in daycare and at school, there's this sort of relentless sickness. And I know from my own experience, when my children were younger and I worked in corporate, I had a period of a few months where I felt like I was endlessly having to call in and ask for personal leave because one of my kids was sick again. Younger or less experienced professionals can also struggle a little bit with boundaries, particularly if you are maybe in your 20s, or even in your early 30s. And I see this more with women than men. There can just sort of be this sense you're a little bit less confident, you're a little bit less seasoned. And there's this sort of idea that you need to sort of prove yourself. You really want to sort of do well, show the value that you add in order to sort of to get ahead. So there can be a tendency to overgive. And people in that category, I think, are at a risk of finding it hard to push back, particularly when maybe work is piling up on their plate, or they're being given tasks that they don't feel that they have the skills or the confidence to tackle, or perhaps if other colleagues or managers are putting work on their plate that's not even really sort of within their position description, they may sort of lack those the sort of skills in how to push back on that, or feel like it's not comfortable for them to do that. Some of the other reasons why people struggle with boundaries generally, so not limited to particular categories of workers like part-timers, mums, or younger professionals, is particularly since post-COVID, those blurred lines between work and home. All right. So we often talk a little bit about this sense of give and take, when it comes to work, increasingly, particularly if you have working from home days. It's not uncommon for people to maybe sort of go out and do a yoga class or a Pilates class, or go and do a school pickup. And so some workers really struggle a little bit with that blurred line. And there can be this sense that if you're going out, to do a yoga class at 11 o'clock, maybe you need to be present and online and working at sort of 7 or 8 p.m. So in many ways, that post-COVID way of working with that flexibility and that fluidity has been a blessing. But at the same time, those blurred lines can create difficulty for people who struggle with boundaries and are able to switch off. There can be this sort of sense that you're sort of always on or always working, or you tend to overcompensate a little bit. You might feel guilty because you've put on some washing. Maybe you've been putting something, sort of on the slow cooker, during the work day. And so you might still sort of be feeling a little bit guilty and like you need to kind of overcompensate or make up for that. At the same time, social media and technology has made it, in some ways, much easier to work flexibly, much easier to work remotely, but there is a little bit of a blurring there because it's sort of like most people have emails on their phone. We're sort of always on in many ways. It's not uncommon for people to be checking their work emails, directly before they go to bed, even though we know that that's not necessarily healthy behavior. It's not conducive to good sleep. But it feels a little bit like there's very little excuse these days to not be available or not contactable. And I know certainly from my own perspective, as a small business owner, it's not uncommon, and I don't begrudge my clients that. It's not a problem for me, but it's not uncommon. If I don't reply to an email from a client, a lot of my clients follow me on social media. Rather than wait for a reply to my email, it's not uncommon for me to then get sort of like a Facebook message or an Instagram message saying, "Oh, hey, Hannah, you may not have seen my email, but just to let you know, I've emailed you about a thing." And so, there's so many great things about social media and technology, but in some ways it can be a little bit hard to have boundaries. People very much are accessible and available around the clock these days. So these are some of the reasons why people struggle with boundaries. You may be someone who's in a particular category or a particular group of worker where you are sort of at risk of, feeling like you need to overcompensate. And also it's just, I think, in the same way, it's a blessing of the modern work world. It's also a little bit of a curse. It can be hard to have that delineation between work life and personal life. Sounds a little bit stereotypical, but I see it a lot in working with my clients. I've coached nearly 250 clients now. There can be a tendency, again, predominantly with women, but also I see that in male clients to display that sort of, people-pleasing behavior. A lot of people find it hard to say no. We want to be seen as helpful. We want to be seen as useful. It's nice to be valued. It's nice to be able to support people. But if you are someone who struggles a little bit with boundaries and you are someone who tends to overgive, then boundaries can feel really difficult for you. So that's not uncommon. There are 3 layers to successful boundaries. You've got to know what they are. You have to identify them, you have to communicate them, and then you have to hold them. So let's unpack that a little bit. Identifying boundaries. So you need to be really clear as that first layer of what is a boundary for you? What is something that you're not willing to cross, or it would really need to be an exceptional circumstance in order for you to cross it? So I'm going to use an example here about a part-time worker who's a mother. Perhaps they work 4 days a week, but Friday is a day when they really sort of value that one-on-one time with their little one. Maybe their little one's not at school yet, and Friday is sort of like a mummy and child day. So on Wednesdays, I spend that with my 4-year-old. He's not at kinder. That's a very much mummy and Oscar day. And it would have to be something quite exceptional for me to do a client call on that day. I want to be fully present. I want to also be able to be fully present for my clients and for them to not sort of see me with a 4-year-old on me when we're working one-on-one. So my boundary is, unless it's an emergency, sort of a last-minute interview has cropped up for a client, I will only do, sort of written advice, so replying to emails. So you need to be really clear on what that boundary is for you. Maybe you're not willing to take calls or reply to emails or text after 7 p.m. Maybe you're not willing to forego your 12 p.m. yoga class on a Tuesday and a Thursday, like that's what you do on your lunch break. Be really clear on what your boundary is and why it's important to you. And you need to communicate it. So people can't honor a boundary if they don't know that it exists. So it's on you to communicate that. It can be really helpful instead of using sort of passive language around, I can't. So look, I can't attend meetings on a Friday. Make it a little bit more assertive. So look, I don't attend meetings on a Friday. That's my working from home day. That's my non-work day. I don't attend meetings, rather than I can't, because it implies that if you could, you would. But the point is you don't work on a Friday, so you don't want to be doing it. So you have a conversation with the people who need to know. Utilize any tools that you can. So if you're working in a corporate job and you use email, you might have on your email signature, like, I don't work Fridays. I don't respond to emails on my non-work day. I will reply on a Monday when I'm back in the office, or when I'm back on. So communicating what that boundary is. Sometimes you need to be a little bit more active in that communication. So having an email signature or a voicemail is not sufficient. You might need to actually send an email out to everyone in your team saying, I've actually, I've revised my work hours, for this year. It's been agreed with Joe, the manager, And on Fridays, I'm not working on Fridays, so I'm not available for calls or texts or whatever it is. And then you need to hold the boundary. And that means, if you've identified your boundary, that Friday is your, day at home with your little one, and you've communicated that, and it says it on your email signature, and it says it it's there on your voicemail, and you've told your team, and you're still getting those sort of persistent calls or getting those emails, you've got to hold the line until you don't respond to them. Okay. If you're sort of dipping in and out and you're not holding the boundary, that sends sort of mixed messages that, maybe someone can push their luck, and they might be able to get what it is that they want that you don't want to give on that particular day. So it's sort of on you to, I guess, establish what that boundary is, what your non-negotiable is. It's on you to communicate that and make sure that that message has got across, and it's also on you to hold it. But I do feel like workplaces do have a role when it comes to boundaries. And so it's on the workplace to do a few of these things here. So realistic responsibilities. If you are a part-time worker, if you work 0.6 or 0.8 or 0. Whatever, is it realistic that that role could be fulfilled within that particular, the hours that you work and you're paid for, all right? So if you've worked full-time in the past, but you've asked for your role to be transitioned into a part-time role, and you're confident that you can do it, your workplace needs to also make that assessment about if they reduce your hours down, is it possible for you to be able to do that job in such a way that it's not going to be incredibly stressful? Okay. So, and for any job really, regardless of whether it's full-time or part-time, are the responsibilities and what you're required to deliver realistic, such that you could kind of deliver it without having to miss lunch breaks and having to do constant overtime and having to start work at 5 o'clock in the morning? Okay, so that's on them to kind of make that assessment. Calling out overwork. So particularly for people leaders, I think this is a big one. And back when I worked in corporate, when I was leading teams, if I noticed that I had people who reported to me where I was responsible for their workplace well-being and for making sure that they were able to, carry out their duties within their hours, I would be questioning, like, I've noticed, Claire, that I often get emails from you on a Saturday. Let's have a little look at why that might be. Like, we're not talking about the occasional email here where maybe you forgot something and so you're kind of tackling it while you remember it. We're talking about that sort of constant overwork. Like, if there's someone who's always at their desk once everyone else is clocked off, or there's someone who's always sending these sort of late night emails, then if you're a people leader and there's someone in your team or people in your team doing that, it's a really good idea to call that out and question why that might be. Are they feeling overwhelmed? Are their responsibilities unrealistic? Do they have too much on their plate? Are they struggling to deliver? And what can you do to support them in remedying that? And then setting a good example, again, particularly if you're someone who has people reporting into you, think about the example that you're setting. So we hear about this so often. It's sort of like the advice is, don't send emails after hours, even where you say to someone, oh, look, I know it's 8 o'clock on a Friday. I'm not expecting you to reply, until Monday. It does sort of put a little bit of pressure on someone. People might feel like there's an expectation there, even though you've said, you're not expecting it. Just don't send those late night emails. Don't send weekend emails, particularly to people in your team and particularly to more junior colleagues. Set a good example. If you're a people leader, take a lunch break, like highlight the importance of having really good work-life balance. And if you see that it's not sort of happening in your team, call it out, as I've said in that sort of the last point that I made there. If you're in the process for looking for a new role, and maybe you have struggled in the past with burnout or overwork or unrealistic expectations, or you'll know that you're someone who struggles a little bit with boundaries, there are a few things that you can do ahead of time before accepting a job. Look out for red flag language in the job advert. So sometimes when I'm working with clients and they send me their list of jobs they're thinking of applying for, I'll go through that. And it's not that I would take that as gospel and that would be the, the sort of the defining thing that made me decide whether to go for a job. But if you're looking at a job ad or a PD and it's very much, fast paced, high pressure, lots of output, that's giving you a little bit of a signal about what the environment's like. If there's lots of talk in there about, we work hard and play harder, it's that kind of real hustle language. And that's not something that you really want to be, a feature in your next role. I would, again, not necessarily not apply for that job, but that would be a bit of a red flag for me. So we're looking for that language in the job advert that tells you that it's sort of go, go, go culture, hustle culture, everyone sort of working at 110% all the time. You can ask questions at the interview about how the organisation supports healthy work-life balance. I think it's absolutely fine to kind of ask those questions these days. It used to be really taboo, sort of 5-10 years ago. People would very much sort of shy away from asking about any of those questions about annual leave and well-being and time off. It sort of wasn't the done thing. But I think it's really important to ask these days. And you can either, at an interview, ask that to the hiring manager. Tell me a little bit about how you support the team in maintaining a healthy work-life balance. You can ask a little bit about sort of peaks and troughs, like what's the general pace of the kind of the output and the work. And if you've got someone from an HR team who's sitting there in the interview, you can ask that more broadly. So tell me a little bit about what are some of the successful measures you've put in place to support employees with well-being and great work-life balance. Ask the question. It doesn't make you look like a slacker. It doesn't make you look lazy. It makes you look like a well-rounded individual who values their health and their well-being and knows that there's more to life than work. If you're still in any doubt, have a frank conversation. So you could maybe think about having that conversation. If you've maybe got closer to an offer stage, you think maybe you're about to sort of be the selected candidate, or you've been made an offer and you're sort of like, I'm really interested in the role. I like the organisation, but I just have a sense that the culture here is pretty hardcore. I think you can have a frank conversation. If you've had some unfortunate experiences in the past, maybe the culture sort of has caused burnout, you don't necessarily want to dive into that and really unpack it. But I think it's okay to say, look, it's really important to me in making my next move that I go to an organisation that genuinely values its employees and their whole selves and all aspects of their life. Could you tell me a little bit about how have some of your parents who have been returning to work, how have they found the workplace culture? So I think you can have a bit of a conversation and ask some questions. Anyone who takes exception with you kind of teasing that out and wanting to understand a little bit about, what's the expectation and what's the organizational culture like, it's probably an organization where you're going to run into difficulties and perhaps not somewhere that you necessarily want to go. So just a little bit there on boundaries. I talk about them so often. One of the reasons I talk about them so often is because people struggle with them so much. And because some of the most common reasons that I see people coming to work with me is because they're really feeling that burnout. They're struggling with work-life balance. Their role in their organization is not working for them in, a new stage of life. And it's not always motherhood. It's not always that people have had children and they're needing to kind of make that balance work. I also have older clients who are perhaps wanting to prioritize other things. So it's not just something that people who have children need to think about or struggle with. It's something for all of us to think about. Mastering the networking game, again, that's something that I often talk about, and I'm seeing it even more within my work with my clients, particularly in the second half of last year. There was a stark difference between the clients who are getting ahead, people who are getting those interviews and ultimately, getting the job, between those who are drawing upon their network, those who had sort of active warm networks and were well connected, and those who are going in cold. All right, those who are just applying for jobs they'd seen on Seek without having, done any kind of networking around the role. Such a huge difference. Networking feels icky to a lot of people. Here are some of the reasons why. I think pretty much all of us have had at least a couple of negative past experiences. I know in the past, particularly when I was younger and before I'd sort of really done some work on improving my networking skills. Just of going to this event and feeling like you were standing on the outskirts or like you were tagging onto someone else's conversation. You didn't really have anything to say. Maybe you found it a little bit difficult to kind of break into a conversation. Or on the flip side, maybe it was one of those events where there were sort of awkward icebreakers, or it was sort of like you had to say something about yourself, and that maybe felt really awkward for you. So a lot of people have had negative past experiences. A lot of people are out of practice, particularly since since COVID. I think a lot of people have become less sort of sociable and less in person than they used to be. We've got less. Even a lot of interviews, are conducted online. First, second, and third interview. We're just not so much in that kind of one-on-one physical space anymore, or group and sort of group events. So a lot of us are out of practice. And a lot of us are hanging on to an old idea of what networking is that doesn't do us any favors, and that's very much that kind of perception of, you go to this event, it's a really crowded room, people are just handing business cards. It's very much sort of transactional and sort of like, what's in it for me? Or maybe you sort of just feel really, I had one client of mine that used to hate it, and she just would say to me, like, I spent all my time by the canapes table just waiting for it to be over. But that is absolutely not what networking needs to be like. If you're someone with low self-confidence, you don't like talking about yourself, you actually don't like, you find it difficult answering questions like, what do you do? And you don't really want any attention drawn to yourself, that's another reason why networking can feel icky. It's sort of like, on the one hand, we fear that no one's going to talk to us, but on the other hand, we also sort of don't want to have to talk, because if we're not confident, that can feel quite challenging or anxiety inducing for us. But that old perception of networking, when you're in that big busy room with the canapes and everyone's handing out business cards and you have no one to talk to, or maybe you had a 2-minute conversation with someone and they've sort of walked off because they've seen someone that they know, that doesn't have to be how you network. You can choose what networking means to you and how you do it. You can choose what you go to, who you talk to, and what you talk about. You don't even need to talk business at a networking event. You can talk about, when I'm working with my clients on a networking strategy, I always help them sort of shape up a few questions, that they can draw upon with regards to sort of their career or their organization or professionally, but also just general chit chat. You don't have to make small talk. You can ask people like what their travel plans are. Are they binge watching anything great on Netflix at the moment? There's this assumption that when we're networking, it has to be business talk, but you can actually choose to talk about whatever you want to. And you can choose how you follow up with the people that you meet and what you do with those relationships. So what you don't want to do is walk away from an event with a stash of business cards, and don't do anything with them, because that's a pointless waste of time. So often I'll work with clients on developing an effective networking strategy. There are a few sort of common components to that, but it will vary from person to person. One of the biggest mistakes I see people make is not showing their existing network any love. You kind of gather up people on LinkedIn, or you've got the contact details of people that you've worked with in the past, former managers, senior leaders that perhaps you've worked with on projects, they thought really highly of you, but you don't show your existing network any love. Before you start going out there to make new connections, which is the next topic I'll talk about, it really does pay to go through your existing network, reach out to people, say hello, go for a coffee with someone, ask them how they're doing, congratulate them on the new job that you've seen that they've got on LinkedIn, ask them if they've seen so-and-so for a while. You really want to keep those networks warm so that when the time comes, when you do suddenly see your dream job at that organization, where, perhaps a former executive manager that you've worked with is now, part of that hiring process, it's going to feel really yucky to reach out to them and be like, hi, I'm really interested in that job, when you haven't spoken to them in 5 years. So it doesn't need to be taxing. It doesn't need to take up a huge amount of time. Once a month, I would go through my LinkedIn network. I do. And I reach out to people, ask them how they're doing. I just, share some content that I found that I think that would be interesting to them. Go for a coffee with a former manager. Use those connections well ahead of actually needing anything. Make new connections. So if you work in a particular industry, or there's a new industry that you want to work in, or you've got some idea in your mind about where you want to go next, start to make some new connections ahead of time. Have a look on LinkedIn, ask your contacts, do you know, you really want to work at ANZ? Do you guys know anyone that works at ANZ? If you're in marketing, and an organization that you're interested in has done a particularly great marketing campaign recently, you can reach out to someone by finding them on LinkedIn and invite them to connect. Don't do it cold. Like, let them know, why it is you're reaching out. You can say, look, I've always found, the marketing campaigns that your organization has done really refreshing. I see you've recently, that campaign has done exceptionally well. It would be really great to connect with you here and keep in touch. So, you don't want to just send someone a request with no kind of context around it. But it always pays to make new connections, particularly those that are relevant to where you want to be going in your next career move or your subsequent career move. Be realistic in terms of the commitments that you're going to make as part of this networking strategy. So for me, I would say I make a point of going for a couple of coffees a month with not just people that I already know, but reaching out to someone to make a new connection. And I try to get along to an event or sort of a group event at least once a quarter. I also go through my LinkedIn, as I said, once a month and send out some messages to people, see how they're doing, see what's new. For me, that's realistic. 2 coffee dates a month, 1 LinkedIn sort of trawl a month, and then I try and get along to that sort of larger scale event once a quarter, which takes me to my next point. If you're time poor, you really want to increase the ROI, the return on investment from where you're spending your energy. So going to networking events where there are multiple people that you can connect with at any one time, or perhaps if you're wanting to reconnect with someone that you've worked with at an older organization, maybe getting a few of you together for a lunch, that can be a really smart idea if you're particularly time poor, because we don't all have, so many hours to kind of network one-on-one. Choose the right networking approach for you is really kind of the key thing here. Make sure what it is that you're mapping out as part of your strategy is realistic for you, and make sure wherever you're spending your time and your energy, it's smart. It's somehow aligned with where you're going. You're utilizing what you've already got. When you're reaching out to someone for, a networking coffee or a call or a favor, this is the components of a successful ask. You want to be really clear on what it is you're asking for, why you're asking them, and when. Okay. So if you're really interested in working at, NAB, and a former colleague of yours or a friend of a friend works at NAB, and you want to send them that request for a coffee or a chat, be really clear on what it is you want, why you want it from them, and when you want it. I often hear from clients, I'll sort of say to them, what have you done on the networking or connection front? And they'll say, oh, look, I sent out a few messages saying to people it would be great to connect for a coffee. But they haven't put any particular time frame around it. If there's some sense of urgency, if they haven't highlighted that, there's a job that's going, it closes in a few weeks, I'd love to know a bit more about the culture. They've just been really vague. And that's when you tend to not really get responses, or you get that response from someone going, yep, a coffee sounds great. Let's do that in the next few months. You want to put some kind of parameters around it. So you'd say, hey, Jamie, we met at Joe's dinner party a few months ago. I remembered that you worked at NAB, and I'm really interested in learning more about the organization. I think that's somewhere I might like to try and get my foot in the door this year. I'd love to take you for a coffee to get a sense from you about, the organizational culture. Mondays are a really quiet day for me. I'm happy to come to you, but, obviously flexible. It would be really great if we could, do that in the next month or two. So just putting a little bit of parameter around that, not being pushy. And look, you get what you give. So I think you could be someone else's cheerleader, connected to others, referee, recommendation giver, and mentor. I really enjoy connecting people for useful discussions with, other people that I know. So you get what you give. Do it generously. Don't just do it because you're hoping to get something in return. But I really think that's the beauty of networking. It's not just who can someone else network you to, but like how can you give back as well. Continuous professional development. So this is something that is easy to neglect, particularly I think in a kind of economic climate where maybe workplaces are saying they don't have as much budget, to spend on people doing training and courses. A lot of people are sort of tightening their belts a little bit. So you may feel like spending money on professional development feels like something that's a bit challenging for you in the current economic climate, but you really don't want to let those continual skills boosting opportunities fall by the wayside. So I'm just going to talk through some of the skills that I see as being in demand for 2024 and beyond. They're very much thematic. It's around data analytics, hybrid work fluency, business analysis, entrepreneurship, innovation, project management, AI knowledge, sales and business developments, critical thinking and problem solving, leadership and communication. Now, what these all have in common, it's around sort of technology and data, like working smarter, data informed decision making. There's a lot in there around relationships, communication, networking, sort of leadership. And then there's also a lot in there around sort of innovation, problem solving. It's more around the sort of fluid ways of working. So a lot of these skills are around sort of tech, and they're also those more kind of human-centered skills. All right. So happy to have any follow-up messages from people later who want that list, because I haven't got it on the slide there. It would have been quite long. Choose something that your future self will thank you for. Okay. So I think a lot of people tend to feel like, particularly if they're asking for their workplace to fund it, you feel like it really needs to be directly related to the job that you're doing now and like your current self. You feel like you really need to prove how it will add value to the job that you're already doing, and probably already doing really well. So think about your ideal next job or move, what that is, and then try and use that opportunity for your professional development to help your future self get there. So something I often work with clients on is a bit of a skills gap analysis about, where you are now and where you want to go. Ask yourself how you currently stack up and identify any gaps. And that really is where you want to be looking at investing in professional development. Or taking the opportunity to start to fill that gap a little bit before you're wanting to make that next move. For me, the right balance of professional development, I often say to my clients when we're working on their PD strategy for the year, it's around sort of 3 streams for me. One is around technical skills. So how are you keeping up to date with the latest tech? How are you using technology to work smarter, not harder? Soft skills, so more around those kind of transferable soft skills, human-centered skills, and also leadership capability, whether you're in a leadership role or not, whether you have aspirations, necessarily to be a leader in your next role. I think it's a smart idea to always think about the possibility of wanting to move into leadership down the track. And making sure that you've got some sort of professional development there. It's particularly useful if you want to move into leadership and you haven't, actually led teams before. How can you get, and a lot of organizations have leadership development programs. They're often very good. So I think if you haven't been on an organization's leadership development program before, they're often run for sort of groups in-house. That's something to certainly look at if you have not led teams before. So technical skills, soft skills, and leadership capability for me is the right balance for what I would want to see people having PD in, each year. Think outside the box. PD isn't always a training course. It might be be a member of a professional association, and maybe you go along to some events or access webinars, there. It could be going to an annual conference each year with, a host of speakers and small group sessions, a great opportunity to network again. It could be mentoring and coaching, either formally or informally. It could even be, a subscription to a publication or a resource. So it doesn't always have to be a training course. If your organization doesn't have a lot of budget, if you maybe work for a not-for-profit, or if maybe there's been a bit of a freeze on professional development spend, it doesn't always need to be that you're going off, to do an MBA or even like a short course at a uni. It could be something else. Boosting self-confidence. This is something that, it's a work in progress for most people. And I often, there's no magic bullet to boosting self-confidence. If there was, I would be a very rich person. I'd be selling that. I think there can also be a little bit of what self-confidence means to different people is very different. What it means to me is it's not perfection. It's not having all of the answers and being fearless. It's about having your own back and the unwavering belief that whatever curveballs or slip-ups arise, you can handle it. So it's completely backing yourself. It doesn't mean that you're not someone that gets nervous at interviews. It doesn't mean that you don't get the sweats if you're giving a speech on stage. It doesn't mean that you don't hate difficult conversations. It just means that you trust that you can handle it and that you can do the hard thing. And even if you don't do a great job, it's not the end of the world. Okay, so I say this all the time, this next point, and I think I probably said it in all of my webinars with WORK180. If you don't believe in you, why would they? Okay, and you want to beware the imposter syndrome loop. It's so easy to get stuck in it. The less you believe in yourself, the less anyone else will. And the less anyone else believes in you, the less you'll believe in yourself. And so you get stuck in this really vicious cycle. But the reality is, if you don't believe in yourself, if you don't think you're a great candidate for the job, I'll never say the best candidate for the job because you don't know who the competition is. If you don't feel, that you are credibly enough or enough of an expert or you know your stuff, then why would you be put into a leadership role? Why would people be trusting your advice if you don't back yourself? It's very, very hard. If you're someone who's clearly sort of doesn't have that confidence and you're needing that constant reassurance from people, you are going to undermine your credibility. All right. So it's not perfectionism. It's not having all the answers. It's not being fearless. It's about having your own back and just being sort of quite strong in your presence. Top tips for becoming more confident or for building self-confidence. Become an expert, and an expert will always keep learning. So this is not an end point here. So developing that expertise and becoming a trusted expert, it's not this linear journey and you reach a point and it stops, okay? Become an expert, read more, learn more, speak to the experts, go to webinars on a particular topic, practice doing that thing over and over again until you get really, really good at it. Learn from the best. So, with public speaking, like who are some people that you think are really good, engaging public speakers? Watch them in action, learn from them, ask them what their thought process is when they're writing their speech. Get comfortable with compliments and credit. So people who lack self-confidence will often sort of disbelieve a compliment. They'll struggle to take credit. They'll say, oh, look, it was nothing. Like it really wasn't that good. It could have been better. Get comfortable with taking compliments. And when someone says to you, great job, you can say, yeah, thanks. I worked really hard on that. Like that went well. And take the credit. Ask for feedback. So, ask for feedback, ask for where you're doing well, ask for, where there's opportunity to kind of do better. And be brave in taking that feedback. So a lot of people who lack self-confidence can really struggle with feedback, even if it's, sort of well-meant and well-intentioned, it can feel quite crushing. You need to develop a level of comfort with being able to hear that feedback, even if it is that the feedback is you could have done better and this is how you could have done it. Okay, so we need to depersonalize that a little bit. Focus on the wins, the progress, and what went well, and less on, where perhaps something didn't pan out the way that you'd hoped, or where maybe something sort of was a little bit off. We want to focus on the wins, the progress, and what went well. All right, the art of public speaking. So this is a new one. And when I talk about public speaking, I don't just mean standing on stage and giving a speak. I'm talking about your ability to use your voice and your ability to kind of take up and hold space. All right. So common fears around public speaking. Everyone's looking at me. I'm going to stuff up what I want to say. I look fat, unattractive. I have nothing interesting, clever, or funny to say. I'm going to trip over or fall over. When I get up to go on stage, they're going to see me sweating. My voice is wobbling. These are all things that I actually hear, and things, some of these I've, even felt myself before. So these are common fears around public speaking. Everyone's going to have their own sort of individual, fears. And some of those may be based on experience. So perhaps you've, done some public speaking in the past or had to do a thing before and it didn't go well. Or perhaps, you didn't get the applause that you'd hoped for, or perhaps you did forget your lines, okay? So sometimes those fears are based on a past event. Sometimes they're based on the unknown. So like maybe you've never given a speech before. Maybe you've never had to deliver a presentation on something your work area is doing to the board, right? So sometimes it's based on a lack of experience. You haven't done the thing. Start small and build up is probably the best advice I can give you there. So public speaking, that even includes how you come across an interview, how you speak, how you project your voice, how you take up space, the body language you use, your ability to not take control, but share control of the conversation to make it more two-way and less of an interview, your ability to ask, questions, and your ability to build a rapport with the interviewer, right? Interviewing is public speaking. You're opening your mouth in public and you're speaking. It includes one-on-one meetings, perhaps when you're having a meeting with your manager. It includes team meetings where there's maybe 6 or 8 people in a room and it's a shared space. It might be that you are presenting or facilitating or delivering a training session or standing on a stage and giving an event in front of 20 people or 1,000 people. All right. So when I'm talking about public speaking, it's not just that kind of extreme, large scale event, you giving a speech, which is what I think a lot of people think public speaking is. It's all of those different scenarios that I've just talked about. It's what I'm doing now. It's public speaking. You're not here in the room with me, and I actually can't even see any of you. I can only see my slides, but this is public speaking. So start small and build up. If you're someone who, doesn't even really contribute in a team meeting because that feels difficult for you, like that might be a good starting point. If you're someone who goes along to meetings with a senior or with your manager, but perhaps there are, more senior colleagues in the room, members from the senior management team or the ELT, look for opportunities to contribute, even if it's asking questions, even if it's just sharing your view, okay? You've got to find your voice. Presenting, facilitating, and training, that's more around, sort of that large scale where you're, more in control. So it's all eyes on you. You're there to kind of hold space, to be engaging, potentially to be a little bit funny, to share information. You're probably there because you have some kind of an expertise or you have information to share. And then obviously events can be, a huge number of things. When it comes to the crunch, here are a few basics that can help. And, some of these are so elementary, you're almost going to be like, I can't believe you're telling me this, Hannah. Watch and learn again. So think about, who do you find a really engaging public speaker? Who do you feel has really kind of nailed it when it comes to getting that balance between, being warm and engaging and building a rapport, but also being professional and being credible and showing that expertise? How do you present that information or the knowledge that it is that you have in here? How do you do that in an interesting way? How do you keep people kind of captivated by what you're saying? So who do you think does it really well? Watch them, and watch them again and again and again, and learn from them. But you want to be yourself, so you want to put your own kind of slant on that. Look your best, okay? Absolutely, get your hair done, put your makeup on, wear a shoe that's going to be kind of comfortable, but make you feel that you're sort of, powerful as well. So like maybe wear a heel, wear an outfit that's going to make you feel really kind of comfortable and confident, but like your best self. Like you want to be polished. You don't want to stand there wearing clothes that feel too tight or too small or like you're too bulgy. You want to know that you're having a great hair day. You don't want to be wearing a top where sweat patches and your armpits are visible. It sounds really elementary, but when you look your best, you will feel better, okay? Prepare and practice. There's a fine line there. You want to prepare and you want to practice, but you also don't want to over prepare and over practice. So it's sort of like, don't leave it to the last minute, but you also don't need to prepare sort of months and months ahead of time. Like be kind of reasonable in your prep and your practice. If you're giving a speech or you've got a sort of time period, time it a few times. Make sure you're not talking for too long. There's nothing people hate more than a speech that goes on forever and ever. People will start to tune out. And maybe even do that in front of a couple of trusted people. If it's a work presentation or a work speech, do that in front of a trusted colleague or your manager once or twice, and then put it aside until a day or two before the event and come back to it then. Invest in some professional development. So you can do professional development or coaching on public speaking, whether that's, your interview prep, whether that's around being an engaging facilitator, or whether it's even like how to write and deliver a great speech. Please know this, if you are the center of attention, if all eyes are on you, which they should be, because if they weren't, it would be a bit rude. Like imagine if you were presenting or giving a speech and people weren't looking at you and they were just chatting to each other and looking on their phone. So the irony is we're all feeling having, 10 eyes on us, 10 pairs of eyes on us or 100 eyes on us, but also we would feel pretty terrible if no one was looking at us and like we weren't, commanding people's attention. But the irony is it's sort of like, it's a fear, but it's also something that we really kind of want at the same time. Most people in an audience, whether it's you presenting a session at a conference or you standing on a stage in an audience, they're already admiring you and in awe of the fact that you're standing up there. they're already feeling exceptionally grateful that they're not the person that's having to stand up there, because most people have some level of discomfort around public speaking. Okay, the most seasoned public speakers are going to get some, some nerves ahead of time. I've done a lot of public speaking in my time. I've been trained professionally on it, both in my kind of early days where I trained as a barrister, and then all through my political career. I very much, and even when I worked in media, like I've had that full training where you've got journalists sticking microphones in your face and cameras. But I had to give a speech at the end of last year, just before Christmas, to about, I think, about 650, 700 people in the audience. I'd written my speech, I'd done my couple of practices, I'd done the test run. It was a good length of time. It was funny. I was very kind of comfortable with the content. But I'm not going to lie, like, even at the age of 43, as a well-seasoned public speaker and presenter, when I was called up to the stage, I felt like my legs were going to buckle, and I questioned for a minute whether I was going to vomit. Like, absolutely I did, as I made my way up to the lectern with the blinding lights and like the big screen with me on it behind me. I wondered whether I was either going to pass out or fall over, and all of those common fears. So you want to start small, build up, practice, know that no one is thinking anything badly of you. They are just absolutely admiring the fact that you're up there. Pretty soon after getting into it, once you've kind of made that start, things do start to flow a little bit more easily, and you'll sort of find that it's something. The more you expose yourself to it, the easier it gets and the better you become at it. But everyone finds it icky. All right. I'm going to start to wrap up now because I've gone for 51 minutes. So I've already gone over what I had hoped to or planned to do. I've got an upcoming mini challenge coming up in the first week of February, where I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into each of the 5 topics that we've covered today. And I'm going to give you some opportunities to put into practice some simple exercises on each of the topics that I've covered. So each day I'm going to have a short video over on my Instagram and my Facebook, where I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about the topic. I'm going to be sending out a short exercise that you can do each day with some steps that you can follow to practice your skills, or really kind of hone your ability to do, each of the 5 things we've talked about. And it'll also give you an opportunity to then, reply and let me know how you went, or ask me for some tips on how you might go about applying that to your individual circumstances. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's always a pleasure to join WORK180 for these webinars. So I hope you found it useful. Jenna, I'm going to hand back over to you. So I'm going to stop sharing in a minute. There's a little icon there that you can scan. If you want to have a chat with me to have one of my free mini coaching calls, you're welcome to do that. And it's also got my social media handles there. So jot those down, take a little screenshot, or if you don't have time to catch that now, you can always follow up with the WORK180 crew after our webinar, and we can reconnect on a sort of one-to-one basis there. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. Yeah, that was awesome. Really great actionable advice, everyone. So we have a question. It has 11 likes, so I think it's an important one.
What's the question?
It's a good one from Anne. Do you have any tips for networking in tech or other male-heavy events? How to make connections without being misinterpreted as flirting?
Oh, okay. So there's a couple there. Let's unpack that. I'm going to save the flirting as a separate point. Yes. So look, it can be harder. And I actually have a lot of clients that I've worked with in male-dominated industries, specifically in tech, construction, and AFL. I would look to find networking events within those industries that veer more towards the female. Like, you can find them more, particularly in IT and tech. So look for events or networking opportunities that are geared more towards women, within that particular sector or within that industry. If, there just aren't that many, and it's sort of like, this is the event, it's open to men and women, consider going with a couple of colleagues. Maybe there's another sort of female colleague or a couple of you that can go together. So safety in numbers is if you're in danger that you're not, but it's sort of like, safety in numbers, go with a couple of other girlfriends or female colleagues. If you're finding that there aren't the opportunities, for women only, you might reach out to some of the organizations that are hosting those kind of general events and ask them if they've considered holding, like a breakfast for women. or if they are open to kind of, hosting sort of events that are tailored more towards, the female workers within that group. So I think, see if there are any female events within tech or within construction or within mining, because, I've got clients across all of those different sort of areas. If there are not, and you want to go to this particular event, take a couple of your female colleagues along with you. Ask if there's any scope for future events to be more geared towards women or for women only. On the flirting point, look, I think it's a hard one, and I want to choose my words carefully. People are always going to create their own stories. Like if you're going to an event and you're conducting yourself in a way that sort of you're not flirting and you're just being yourself, you can't control how others perceive you. You can't control other people's reaction to you. So I don't really have any particular tips there. I'm wondering if maybe the person who asked the question, Anne, has found that she's maybe received sort of unwanted advances or attention just by virtue of being, maybe one of sort of few females in the room. So I don't know what sort of prompted that particular flirting request. I'm not sure what you would do about that. I've certainly had conversations with people, in the past, even on, school council at a sort of boring meeting with parents, and I've had people kind of give me a phone number and have thought that I'm interested. And I'm like, I don't know where that's come from. So I think if you're not flirting and you're not a particularly flirtatious person, it's on someone else if they're kind of misinterpreting or putting their own slant on things. Obviously, if you're going to an event and you're feeling like it's inappropriate or it's making you uncomfortable, then you would raise that with the event organizer and just say, look, it was a very male-dominated event. I felt, uncomfortable as a female. Like, the vibe was just a little bit off. Is there scope for any events that are geared more towards women, which would sort of, increase the women in the audience? But I don't have any, without knowing the details, the flirting comment there. Yeah, not sure about that one.
Anne says no one wanted attention so far, but the awkwardness of asking someone for coffee.
Ah, okay, all right. That might partly be. It's often in our own mind, like the awkwardness is on our part. You don't need to make that request any differently than you would, if it was a female person or if you're in an event. So the request is just absolutely the same. I'm not saying that you're imagining it, because, I might feel uncomfortable too. I'm sure a lot of people might feel uncomfortable. But I think there's not much you can do there apart from make the ask. And if you think back to what I said, this is what I'm asking for. This is why I'm asking you for it. And this is kind of, the logistics of it. So you meet a male professional at an event. You're really interested in the work their team is doing. The conversation will literally be, hi, Dave, we met at the recent WORK180 event. I was really interested, in the discussion around X, Y, and Z. I would love to follow that up with a coffee and learn more. I mean, suggesting a coffee rather than drinks, keeping it within sort of business hours, those are kind of, I guess, little things that you could put into place to kind of make it clear that it's not a date or anything. But I think that might be a fear or a concern that's more in your head and sort of less in theirs. So I think just try, if you're not getting that unwanted attention and feeling like it's all a bit sort of pervy and creepy, just make the ask in the same way that you would if it was a female person that you were networking in, or even if the balance was more equal 50-50. Like, there's no reason for that, that fear, I think. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, well, I think we can end it there. We're going to be sending a follow-up email with Hannah's links. So reach out to Hannah if you have any more questions and join Hannah's challenge. So I'm going to be there as well.
Excellent.
Yeah, Hannah, do you have anything else to add?
No, just another thank you, Jenna, for being such a wonderful host. Thanks to Jenna and WORK180 for hosting these webinars. And thank you so much to everyone who has come along today. It's always a pleasure to have your attention, and I hope you took something away from it.
Great. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. We're going to end now. We'll see you soon.